Now let's talk about why self-funding is very important to consider in light of the Affordable Care Act. If you think back to 2010, and this slide's relevant all the time, but the reason the Affordable Care Act really came into being was to address two things: cost of health care and accessibility to health care. And this grid is addressing cost. It's showing you that earnings and inflation are running at this trend line down here, and then you have health care premiums and employee contributions to those premiums running up here. That means employees are making less money. And frankly, if employers try to get this trend line down here, you're just cutting benefits at the expense of employees. So the government said, we've got to pass the Affordable Care Act. We've got to do something. And they passed a very, very complex law. And one thing's for sure, it did address accessibility very well. The exchanges, both state-based and federal exchanges, the expansion of Medicaid, these have allowed more people to gain access to health care. Where the law has failed, though, is in its ability to actually address the underlying root cause of health care cost increases, which is the health of the population. And that's where WellNet comes in. We'll talk more about that. This is WellNet's overview of the main aspects of healthcare reform as it relates to exchange or fully insured programs, and then as it relates to self-insured programs. And there are certain aspects, as you can see, that do not affect self-funded programs. The ones you see highlighted on your screen here only affect fully insured programs. And I'm going to talk about a few of these here. First is health insurance tax. This is a tax in the Affordable Care Act charged to fully insured healthcare providers. Basically, it's a tax based on the size of their book of business. I like to say on average it's about a 4% tax. That tax does not exist when you move to a self-insured chassis. There's also premium taxes. Premium taxes, on average, are about 2% in each state, and they are charged on all different types of premiums, healthcare included. When you move to a self-insured chassis, premium tax still applies, but it only applies to the stop-loss portion of your plan, which only represents 20 to 30% of your plan costs. So between this health insurance tax and the premium taxes, you've got quite a tax gain when you move to a self-insured chassis. And I'm going to talk about two more of these other items. I'm sure your broker has already reviewed most of these with you, but I'd like to touch on two more. Guaranteed issue. Fully insured carriers must comply with guaranteed issue. Self-funded carriers do not. What does this mean? That means anyone that applies to a fully insured carrier, anyone, must be offered coverage, and the carrier cannot ask them any health questions, and the carrier has to insure every single one of their pre-existing conditions. Now, if you're the insurance carrier and you have to cover everyone that applies, and you have to cover their pre-existing conditions, but you can't even ask them what those conditions are, obviously you have to raise rates, and that's why you're seeing your premiums continue to escalate at a rate at or above what it's been doing historically, generally speaking. Now, this one's my favorite. This is merely my opinion, but I think you'll like this. Part of the Affordable Care Act said that fully insured carriers must adhere to these medical loss ratio requirements. What does that mean? For most of you listening to this webinar, you probably have more than 50 employees. And the loss ratio rules for a 50-plus employer state that if you're fully insured, 85% of the premium being charged must go out to pay a claim. You've got to pay out 85% of what you take in the form of a premium. The flip side of that means that the insurance carrier can only retain 15% as their revenue. Not profit, just revenue. Now, those fully insured carriers are in business just like you and I, and they need to earn more revenue next year than they earned this past year. But this law, which was designed for a good reason, it was designed so fully insured carriers can't just arbitrarily raise rates. But what it did was cap the revenues of these insurance carriers. So think about it. How can an insurance carrier today earn more revenue? Option one, they sell more lives. Option two, the premium goes up. So their 15% represents more revenue. However, you cannot arbitrarily raise premiums because 85% of that premium has to be a claim. So when I think about it, if I'm an insurance carrier and I know that the only way I can raise rates is if my claims make up more than 85% of my premium, then what I'm going to do is not do anything about your claims. I'm going to let your people get sicker. I'm going to let the claims continue to climb. Because the higher those claims go, the easier it is for me to apply to the state insurance department and tell them I need to raise rates. And when they look at my data, they'll see my claims keep going up, and they'll let me raise rates, which means my revenue now went up, since my 15% is 15% of a much larger pie. Now let's give the insurance carriers the benefit of the doubt for a moment, and let's assume they're not intentionally raising your claims. Let's assume that they've managed your claims so well that you have a 50% loss ratio. 50%, that means you paid $1 million, your claims were only $500,000. Who gets to keep that money? You might say to yourself, well, the way you've just explained the loss ratio laws, you're going to get that money back, at least a portion of it, but that's unfortunately not true because those loss ratio rules apply to the insurance carrier's entire book of business, not just you. So that means that even in a year where you had a 50% loss ratio, the insurance carrier keeps all that money. And frankly, as you've seen in the past, you still get a rate increase, which your broker probably successfully negotiates a little bit, but your costs continue to escalate, and there doesn't seem to be any hope in sight. The reason that groups consider self-funding, aside from the tax ramifications I talked about a moment ago, is endless flexibility and transparency and the ability to manage risk. You can have any plan design you want for the medical or the pharmacy. You're going to have completely transparent data to all of your claims information. Not by name. I'm not going to tell you that John Augustine has this or that, but I am going to tell you exactly what medical conditions everyone in your population has, except I'm going to identify them through a member number, not their name. We're going to use predictive modeling to identify which members are at the highest risk, and then we're going to, through population health management and engagement programs, WellNet on the back end is going to try our best to manage the compliance levels, the health of those members in an effort to lower your claims. And frankly, when your plan runs well, you get all the money back. And that's why all these large companies, 93% of groups over 5,000 self-fund, and almost 50% of mid-market groups are self-funded because they get the benefit of their good years. And statistically, 80% of years are good years. In our case, WellNet has built what we call a level-funded chassis, which lets you keep your money in the good years, and even in the bad years, we are guaranteeing you flat monthly costs, and you'll know your risk the moment you sign up, before you sign up, actually.